Hello and welcome to Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen, and this is another session in which we look at the colours of the film to analyse just where we can go. Now, the film I've chosen for this time is one of the 007 series. I'm not a great 007 fan, never have been, but my husband certainly was, and he collected them all. This, however, was the very first film in which I noticed that if you know what the colour is supposed to represent in society, that you can actually predict what is going to happen next. There's not a lot of colour in this film, but certainly it's not a dark film like many of the others that I've shown, where most of the action is seen in semi-darkness. This one, at least, most of it is in daylight. So let's get into it, shall we? Casino Royale was adapted from Ian Fleming's first 007 novel. It introduced the idea of a secret agent who is licensed to kill. There were two complete films and one TV adaptation that were made from this book. And my initial idea was to compare and contrast the colours in the two films. However, there was a problem. The 1967 version starred Peter Sellers, David Niven, Orson Welles, and Ursula Andress. They were all big names in the cinema of the day, but it was a sarcastic spoof of the novel. Whereas the 2006 film that we're looking at today, starring Daniel Craig, is one that tends to follow the seriousness of the adventures of this secret agent, Daniel Craig, who was a relative unknown at the time. He certainly was a very controversial choice, but eventually he had a 14-year run as the 007 character. That was a record amongst the various different actors that have played 007 over the years. As it turned out, he was highly acclaimed for the reimagining of the Bond image. It turned out to be the fourth highest grossing film of 2006 and the highest grossing 007 film right up until the film Skyfall in 2012. So it had a good run. Now, unlike previous films where I've looked at the characterization and then the plot, I'm going to look specifically at the colours of this one as we go through. And one of the considerations that we need to remember is that the 007 genre sits well and truly within the group of films that I call the Vic flicks, in which there is very little variation in colours between the heroes and the villains. Primarily, the heroes and villains wear black, white, and grey, which is what I refer to as achroma, brown and blue. And we don't see a lot of brown in this film. We see a little bit of blue, but mainly the film for the main characters, for the heroes and villains, is carried out in black and white and grey. There is a use of various women, scantily clad generally, which are called the Bond girls. And this has been a series throughout the entire film. The females generally carry the emotional content, and they do that through the colours that they wear on their bodies. They distract from the narrative, but they also support the narrative and the action within that narrative. Sometimes they can be co-heroes. Mostly they're vulnerable, used, and eventually discarded. The consequences of this for the colour analysis is that we're going to have more of a focus in this session on the female bodies and their costumes. The narrative direction can be predicted through colour. And this is exactly why I've chosen this film, because it was the first film in which I ever decided to sit and predict what would happen next, simply based on the colour content that arrived. Let's get into it then, shall we? The hero in this film, of course, is James Bond. When we first see him, he's wearing grey and a muted multicoloured shirt. He's incognito, and he is chasing a particular villain. He manages to kill that villain, and is wearing black when he is admonished by his superior, M, who tells him off because they wanted to capture that villain rather than kill him. When he's in grey and white, he's doing some reconnaissance on the next villain he is expected to hunt down. Then we find him semi-nude, wearing a blue swimsuit, which is also part of that reconnaissance, but it's also an attention grab because he wants to be noticed. He's also semi-nude when he is hacking M's computer. And then we see him in black and grey when he is seducing that villain's wife, who we will meet shortly. Her name is Solange. In black, blue, and grey, he's foiling the first major scheme of the film. Then we see him in dark blue and brown as he discovers Solange's death. In black, white, and grey, he's sent on a mission with the next female character in the film, who is known as Vesper. And then we see him again in black and white as he attends the first card match against the villain in the casino. Later, after Vesper has been attacked by the villains, you see him without the coat, comforting Vesper in a shower. In black and white, he has been poisoned by the enemy. And then during the torture scene, we see him nude again. In hospital, as he's recovering, he's wearing grey. And then in white and black again, this time, he's seducing Vesper. Grey and black sees him resigning from MI5. And then in a bluish grey, he's following Vesper and unsuccessfully attempts to rescue her. In black and white, he accepts yet another mission, and then finally that mission is completed wearing black, white, and grey. So as we can see, there's not a lot of colour that is available to us to interpret what is happening with the main character. Let's move now to the main villain. Here we have the character called Le Chiffre. Le Chiffre basically means the cipher or the number. And he is the most important of the villains. There are a number of them within the film, but none of them are quite as outstanding as this particular chap. We first encounter him wearing black and brown as he accepts money to launder it for a particular terrorist. And then throughout the remainder of the film, we see him wearing black. Here he is initially at the card game, but later on we also see him in black. In fact, he doesn't wear any other colour. Of note, however, is that Le Chiffre suffers from a bleeding eye, in which we see a small trickle of red that occurs from the corner of his left eye as he finds himself in a situation where he is angered or out of control. It is notable that Le Chiffre does not have any costume colour changes, and this has indeed been classified by many of the critics as being a little uninspired. But when one considers that the book was written in the 1950s, it's no wonder that they would have chosen black as the primary colour to describe this particular character. Because, of course, black was the colour of villainy. So now we turn to the Bond girls. Here is Solange. She is the wife of one of the villains, and she is seduced by 007 for information, which she freely gives. And later on in the film, she is tortured and killed by Le Chiffre. Then we have Vesper. Vesper is the Treasury agent for MI5 who controls the money that Bond is able to access for the casino games. She becomes his love interest and commits self-drowning at the end of the film. Then we have Valenka. Now, Valenka is Le Chiffre's girlfriend. She poisons Bond's drink and is killed by Mr. White, who is the arch-villain whom we don't see a lot of, excepting at the very beginning and then at the very end of the film. And in fact, we see so little of him that it takes a while and probably a second or third viewing before you realize that it is indeed the same character. Valenka is the only female within the Bond girls lineup that is not seduced by Bond. We do, however, have another woman that appears in the film, and this is a special case. This is M. She is the spy master. She was portrayed in this film by Dame Judi Dench, and she has outlived any and all of the portrayed 007s in the entire genre. She's the only female role not involved in personal injury or death, and she has an ability to both sanction and reward Bond for his exploits. She's respected by Bond, therefore not a love interest or even a Bond girl. But she does play a traditional masculine role, and we can see this due to the colours that she wears, which are also traditionally in that masculine grouping. So let's look at these in a little more detail. Black is the colour that she wears most frequently. We see her in it as she leaves the ministerial meeting after Bond's first botched mission, and then when she's giving Bond orders free the bomb threat that he eventually nullifies. She also wears black when she's notifying Bond about the money transfer failure that occurs that causes Vesper's death towards the end. In grey, we see her wearing a coat as she returns home from that meeting originally, and she finds Bond in her home. In white and grey, she's inspecting the site of the Solange murder. And online, she is monitoring Bond's poisoning and recovery, also wearing grey. In grey and black, she's explaining Vesper's sacrifice to Bond, which changes his opinion of what has happened. She also wears red, and this only occurs once, and this is when she is woken by the news that Bond has hacked her computer. So the conclusion that we can come to is that black and grey means that M is all business. In black, she's giving instructions. In grey alone, she's receiving information. When she's wearing red, she is demonstrating anger at the discovery that not only has she been woken from a deep sleep, but that her computer is being unlawfully accessed. So let's now turn to the colours of the Bond girls. And this time we'll be looking at it in terms of the colours first and then the characterizations afterwards. Green is a colour that doesn't appear very often, but it is the first colour that we see on one of the Bond girls' bodies. Here we have Solange's bikini as she notes Bond for the first time as he leaves that ocean scene semi-naked. We also see green on Vesper as she visits Bond as he is recovering from his poisoning. And Valenka also is seen in green. Now, the green she wears as she's preparing to poison Bond is actually rather dark, but we can see it also reflected in the character behind her, who is wearing a much brighter green. So we have a double visual shot here of green. Now, the conclusion that we can draw from the greens that all three women wear is there is a potential here for some sort of alternative action. Are they betraying someone? All three females end up doing exactly that. Then we have pink. Pink is all Solange. She is the only character that wears it, and we see it initially when she is blown off by her husband, who is annoyed with her tardiness, and subsequently she allows herself to be seduced by Bond wearing the same dress. And the conclusion that we can draw from this is that she is feeling unloved and seeking some form of alternative approval. Is she after something for herself? We don't have a lot of information about pink, but certainly that seems to be the case, particularly since the pink is a particularly vibrant one. And then we have brown. Brown is also associated with Solange. And here, whether we can call this a costume or not, it certainly is a hammock in which her body is found after she has been murdered. What is the conclusion we can draw from this? Because it's the only time that any of the Bond girls are associated with the color brown. And perhaps it's all about the reality and the consequences that occur when one is confronted with one's actions. Vesper, on the other hand, is associated with the color black. We see her initially as she's meeting Bond wearing black, and later on she's also wearing black as she watches Bond losing the money. Now, in both situations, we can see a great deal of disapproval and distancing carried out by Vesper. She doesn't particularly like Bond at this stage, and she's making that dislike and disapproval very well known. She also, however, wears white, and again, she's the only female character that appears in white. Here, she's wearing white with a little bit of black in a suit where she meets their liaison at the casino area. Then, as she's preparing to get dressed to go with Bond to the casino for his first major game, she's also wearing white lingerie. And the third time that we see her wearing white, this time with black stripes, she's sailing with Bond after he has decided to resign from MI5. Now, the conclusion we can draw from this white is there is a gradual emotional thawing. The black inclusion in the final film says that she's still keeping some distance or some secrets from him that he is not aware of. Vesper is also the only woman who wears purple. Here, she's wearing the dress that was given to her by Bond so that she's able to distract from the action at the card table, and her wearing of purple is designed to deceive others into not noticing what Bond is up to. Its polar opposite, yellow, is only worn by Valenka, and this is where Valenka is threatened for Le Chiffre's compliance by the terrorists for whom Le Chiffre is supposed to be laundering their money. The conclusion we can draw from this, because it's the only time yellow appears, is that it is a color of alarm and also a reality check. Blue occurs on the bodies of the Bond girls only once, and again, it is Vesper who is wearing it. Now, this particular blue is a little bit more like cyan than blue, but I'm counting it as blue nevertheless, because it is blue with a grey pattern, and it's a dress she wears during her love declaration. And here we find her enacting female submission to Bond's lust. Has she found happiness, as cyan might suggest? We don't really know, but we do know that she is compliant. And here we see red, which is again only worn by Vesper. Here she's dressing herself to meet a contact that she urgently needs to leave Bond to do. And here she's wearing red again, this time with a red jacket as well as red on her bag, as she hands over the money to one of the criminals. And finally, we see her in that same red dress, locking herself into a sinking cage in Venice as she gradually drowns. The conclusion we can have here is that here she's enacting something impulsive and dangerous. And it was indeed this particular red dress that made me realize just how easy it was to predict what someone was about to do in a film simply by the colors that they put upon their bodies. So in summary, typical Dick flicks have very little color variation. The villain and the hero both have a heavy use of black. This indicates a clash of power and also resistance to one another. The female roles are very much segregated, however. The MI5 director links both male and female roles in the colors that are chosen for her costumes, and she's primarily masculine because she is in power and she is giving directions for the action that ensues. There is one emotional scene, of course, in which she's wearing red, where there is potential anger and a threat of punishment towards the recalcitrant Bond. But it's the three Bond girls that are mostly of interest in terms of color. Solange wears green and pink. She's acting on feelings and values. And in brown, when she is in a non-costume hammock, she's showing that there are consequences for acting on those feelings and values. For Valenka, it's green and yellow. She's acting on instructions and taking a chance. She does not interact sexually with Bond, but she dies anyway. And then there is Vesper, who is the most colourful of the Bond girls, primarily because she plays the greatest of the Bond girl parts. She wears black, white, purple, green, bluish cyan, and red in sequence. There is a transition here from being cold and calculating and distant through her black and white performance, through to partnership with Bond and connection. And we see this when she's wearing purple and that bluish cyan. And it ends in betrayal and self-sacrifice, as seen in her green and then red costumes. All three Bond girls suffer a common fate, and that is death. And that is a commonality throughout the entire 007 genre. Many of the Bond girls find themselves eliminated as a result of their interactions with Bond. And there, as we have moved through it, is a colour analysis of the film Casino Royale 2006. The 1967 version has a great deal more colour, and maybe I'll deal with that one at a later date. I don't know. I've watched it a couple of times, and it really is a most confusing film. Too many 007s in it for my liking. All right, then. I hope you've enjoyed this, and certainly come back for the next time we look at another film. If you have any choices, any particular films you'd like me to look at, please put them down in the comments below. And if I can get hold of that film, or maybe even have it within my collection, I'll certainly try and do the analysis for you. In the meantime, may the colours of your life bring you all the joy and happiness that is your due. And I'll catch you next time. Bye.